It's the AgMedia Roundtable on RealAgriculture.com. So we're here today for the first episode of the AgMedia Roundtable. We're joined today by Cowan. She's the editor with Grain Farmers of Ontario magazine. Welcome today, Claire.
Hi, Sean. How are you?
Good. And we're also joined by Lyndsey Smith, who is the editor of Grain News. Welcome today, Lyndsey.
Hello.
Okay, so let's start off talking about what's on all farmers' mind is when they're going to start seeding. Let's start with probably the easier answer. Let's start with Claire. Claire, when are we going to kind of get in the field and start seeding some corn?
Well, corn's probably not going to get into the ground until late April. Last year we had really great planting conditions, and it was a dry and sort of a mild winter. So everything got in sort of early, but we're not as hopeful this year, but we think it'll be pretty average with corn getting in the ground in late April.
So how would that compare to last year, Claire?
Last year last year the whole season was about 2 weeks early, so which is really strange. That's not common at all. Last year was sort of a fluke, and we had a lot of areas had perfect growing conditions throughout the season and had really great yields. This year we're expecting it to be quite a bit more typical. We had it's been sort of a long, cold winter, so we don't have any super high hopes of early planting, but guys will probably hope to get in the ground in late April.
Lyndsey, what's your answer? July?
Yeah, you mean we're going to get seeding this year?
Yeah.
No, I did some. I mean, it's a question I ask quite often whenever I'm chatting with farmers and those sorts of things. And certainly, Manitoba and Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta as well went into the winter very wet, and we had a very trying season last year. This does feel like the winter that will never end. So, I mean, we feel about 3 weeks behind. But what was surprising when I asked a couple of farmers, especially in the east central part of the province, which is, just super wet and tons of snow, and I was surprised by how much optimism, I almost don't want to use the word, but that, with the right drying conditions, the right melting conditions through April, and with some good drying conditions, that maybe we'll be behind. But there was actually a bit of discussion that, this isn't insurmountable, that we'll still get our crop in the ground. It just might be, a couple weeks behind. So,
yeah, would both of you agree that optimism on the farm right now, no matter what the conditions are, is very, very high?
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially in Ontario.
It's pretty surprising, and I think, maybe it's that crop prices are cooperating or something along those lines, but where, I was really blown away by, how hopeful and how farmers are not writing off a season that has not started yet, which is great. I mean, I think it's a great attitude to have.
Yeah, one of the fears that I've been sort of picking up, and actually more so in the corn community, is the fear that prices may have maybe topping a little bit. Claire, are you getting that sense or that feeling or that concern at all?
Well, people are definitely cautious. There's talk that there's going to be a lot more corn in the ground compared to soybeans, but, anything can happen between now and planting. We're not planning to plant until late April, and the markets could really change, and that could really impact acreage, and maybe there won't be as much, dominance from corn as some people are saying now. There's a lot of unknown. People are certainly positive, but with a healthy dose of caution as well. Yeah,
well, corn's brother or sister in the Western Canada is canola. Lyndsey, what are you sort of picking up from farmers?
It's interesting that not that long ago, maybe January, when we were at Crop Production Week, it was all canola all the time. I mean, there were just going to be millions and millions and millions of acres.
There's another crop in Western Canada?
Oh, yeah, I know. It's surprising, but
I wasn't aware.
But what I've kind of as seeding approaches, the kind of the return to more balanced rotations, sticking with rotations, that sort of stuff. The talk has, in my mind anyway, or what I've been noticing, is very much, maybe a bit more canola than normal, but farmers aren't looking at wall-to-wall yellow. Not at all.
It's the same situation in Ontario when it comes to corn and soybeans. Certainly there's a lot of talk about more corn than soybeans, but farmers take their cues from both the markets, but also their crop rotation, and a lot of farmers really hold fast to their crop rotation, and they're not willing to compromise that.
Yeah.
Let's jump over to everyone's favorite topic, which is this very, very popular federal election that we're going to have. I know everyone's excited. We've all got our pom-poms out. We're ready to go. And we know that agriculture is going to be at the forefront of every debate.
Yes. Actually, I was just before chatting here, I went on and, because Jack Layton was here in Regina yesterday, Stephen Harper was here today, although apparently no word yet if Michael Ignatieff is even going to show up. Anyway, but not one word yet about agriculture, not one. And I know it's early days in the campaign, but I have not heard a peep. Not a peep. And they were in Saskatchewan. So.
Have you heard anything, Claire?
Not from the federal, right now things are a little eclipsed in Ontario by the provincial budget drops today. So I know my boss just headed to the lockup, and everybody's sort of waiting anxiously to find out the news about that. So that's sort of eclipsed election just for the day at least. But, as of right now on the federal side of things, I haven't heard a whole lot about agriculture, but I do think that it's going to be there, and it's going to be an important election issue. We're certainly going to try to make it one.
So I think there's a difference. That there's what's going to come up, and there's what the ag community would like to come up. Let's start with the first. What do we think is going to be the issue that's discussed? Start with Claire.
For Ontario, we certainly think the issue is going to be business risk management, and whether or not the federal government will support Ontario specifically in their risk management program. I know that's GFO's big ask, and a lot of farmers are going to plan to make a lot of noise. That's the issue that we'd like to come out in the forefront, and I also think it's the issue that's going to be in the forefront, because just last week, Grain Growers of Canada has come out against business risk management, and with that sort of discussion in the farm community, I think it's certainly going to be a hot button issue. GFO is really disappointed of grain growers' position, but that's what it is, and we're certainly going to try to work hard to make sure that that's at the forefront, because we feel that that's really what our farmers need.
Yeah. Lyndsey, what do you think?
Do I have to say it?
Oh, you should, because you know...
two things. I'll say, the CWP, yes. Okay, it's going to be... it will be brought up. I'm not saying it should or it shouldn't, probably should be. But I think, unfortunately, the CWB issue and how polarizing that is takes center stage so often in these elections, and it eclipses so many other things that really should be talked about and should be highlighted and should be discussed. But it is going to be there. The other thing will likely be farm programs, crop insurance and agri stability and those sorts of things, that, disaster relief, that sort of stuff. I mean, the prairies have had a couple rough years, and they're farmers want to know that the government is going to help them out when they need it. So. Do either of you think that rising food prices will at all come up, and somehow agriculture will get drug into that equation?
I think it's inevitable, unfortunately. I think, I think farmers have to be ready to I don't want to say fight that battle, but be there to dispel myths about sort of what our role is in the rising food prices and sort of what part we play.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you, if I can jump in, Claire, this is something that I sort of struggle with. I mean, we talk a lot about, farmers speaking up and not just defending themselves, but advocating for themselves and for their practices and what they do. But how do farmers do that? Like, what avenue should they really be, how do we get to the nuts and bolts of actually having that happen?
I think there's a bunch of different avenues. I know Peter Vinters was actually at our March Classic a few weeks ago, and he said that the key when you're talking to, whether it's politicians or consumers or anybody really, people want to hear a personal story. And so I think farmers, when they're talking about these issues and advocating for themselves, really need to be able to personalize it and talk about, how volatile markets impacted them on their farms, and food prices aren't rising because, they're greedy or anything like that, but just it's the nature of the business. I don't think any consumer being faced with it would want to see farmers making less money or farmers going out of business. So I think it's really just sort of you need to personalize it to bring understanding, whether that's through visiting your MP or, getting on Twitter and using social media or talking with your local newspaper and things like that. I think there's a bunch of different avenues depending on sort of who you want to talk to and what you want to convey.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So do you think in terms of all this hype and hysteria between now and May 2nd,
My birthday, by the way.
Well, there you go. That
Yeah.
perfectly planned.
Yeah.
I get the sense from a lot of farmers that they feel like across Canada we've obviously had a huge growth in the urban population, and so I hear that well, the reason that agriculture never comes up is not only that it's not important. It's not important because those votes don't matter. Do you pick that up at all?
I definitely pick up the sentiment that people are concerned that their votes don't matter. However, I also recognize that pretty much every farmer that I talk to personally knows their MP or has at least met them, and I don't think the urban population can make that claim. So I think that, yeah, farmers are concerned that they're not relevant, but at the same time, they need to recognize that they have some social collateral, and they can certainly make appointments with their MP and go and talk about the issues. And in order to stay relevant, you really need to stay active. And I think an election is the perfect time to do that, to really speak up and make sure you're heard.
So in terms of the election, what's the one issue that we feel should be brought up?
For me, what should be brought up, funding for AFC and specifically plant breeding. It's just been cut and gathered for so long, and it's too important to lose. I think we need to be reinvesting in AFC and prioritizing those programs. Absolutely.
Claire, do Ontario farmers identify with that topic?
Absolutely. It's certainly a concern. It's certainly on GFO's radar, and we invest in a lot of research, and we partner with AAFC and OMAFRA quite often, and funding for that is a serious concern, especially the A-based funding.
Yeah, so
for those breeding programs and everything like that. So
in this environment, which is an election environment, this is a good time to get those key priorities to get discussed. The issue is that like, how do we get the issue around the need for public plant breeding or private-public partnerships, how do we get that to sort of be identified by the urban voters so that it becomes a bigger issue? Because that seems like a real ag issue. Like, how do we get that to be a bigger topic?
Sorry,
you're asking tough questions, Sean. How do you get urban people interested in breeding?
Well, because if you want it to really be discussed, it's got to be I
agree completely. I agree, but it's a challenge.
Well, I know.
Absolutely a challenge.
Yeah, because if it's just an issue for the ag community, it really doesn't gather any steam, and it's sort of like one of those things that's like, on line 50 of the things we're going to work on once we get elected. It needs to be higher up than that, and so in order to get higher up, I think it has to be, the urban vote has to identify with it. Mm-hmm. So, I think traditionally we've always focused on, okay, we need this breeding because we need to be able to grow bigger crops. And I think we need to focus more on the end result of that, is that we need to be able to produce healthier and bigger crops because of these reasons, and here's how it affects you. Do you know what I mean?
I think you really need to tie it into food security. Security, and also, the economic impact of agriculture in Canada. We need to make sure that the industry is healthy and can continue to grow, because we're a big player in terms of Canada's GDP. Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like the topic of the board, right? So obviously out west, the Conservatives are going to bring up, if we get a majority, we're going to take action here. But in reality, when it's not a national issue, because when the Conservatives go to Ontario, the Ontario farmers are like, there's no better way to put an Ontario farmer to sleep than start talking about the Canadian Wheat Board. Right? And so it's not a national issue, so it's not going to be on that top 10 priority list. And these ag issues have to get into that top 10. Not number one, but they got to sort of be in the ballpark.
Yeah. Well, and that's sort of my point, is that these discussions should happen about the board and those sorts of things, because in the West that is important, but that they shouldn't overshadow some of the bigger picture national issues as well that need to be brought up and need to be discussed. And unfortunately, I think the board discussion, when the leaders and MPs are circulating through the West, that's the only focus, and it really needs to expand beyond that.
Like, I think the rail service review is important, but it puts a lot of farmers to sleep. Never mind bringing it up in a city and saying this is what's important to agriculture.
You're so mean. Well, no, but it is true that I'm not saying, and the logistics side of things is, it's complicated, it's kind of boring, it's sort of, but it's so important. And sometimes we have to pick up less than wonderful topics, like doing an interview about the election. Sometimes we have to take one for the team.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, that's great. Thanks for joining us for the AgMedia Roundtable. Make sure that you check out Lyndsey's editorial in Grain News, and you check out Grain Farmers of Ontario magazine with Claire. And thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thanks.